Hello, welcome everybody to our 3 Steps to Rapid Soil Regeneration webinar series. Today is webinar 4, which is our last webinar in the series. And today's topic is going to be Meet the Soil Regen Pros. And what I like to do while we're waiting for everybody to join is, if you can, in the Zoom chat button, which should be at the bottom of your screen, go ahead and just type in where you're from. We'd like to see what kind of audience that we're getting, what corners of the world is everybody coming from. Iran comes in first and foremost. All right. We've got Denver, Austin, Texas, Norway, Poland, Switzerland, Mexico, Colombia. Wow. Within 10 seconds, I think we pretty much hit almost every continent. I haven't seen an Australia folk come in yet. That's great. Ecuador, New Zealand, Sweden. Yeah. West Norway, Seattle, Washington, Denmark, Canada. Sweet. Yeah, I love this. We got so many folks. There's Australia. Australia's representing. Italy, Sweden, Taiwan. This is great. Very, very cool. All right. Well, we got a lot to cover today. So if we can go to the next slide. And just to kind of talk about the 3 Steps to Rapid Soil Regeneration webinar series, we had webinar 1, which was finding the beneficial microbes in your location. So this is where we actually went through and started talking about the different organisms that make up the soil food web. What is bacteria, what's fungi, protozoa, nematodes, what they look like, and so forth. And then webinar 2 was multiplying the beneficial microbes. And really, this was a large focus on compost. What is, biologically complete compost? How do you make it? Some of the techniques and tricks and tips that we do with compost. And then webinar 3 was applying the microbes to soil and crops. And we had a great guest speaker with Adam York from York Farms and Todd Harrington talking about the really good work that they're doing out in Illinois with corn and soybean crops. And then today, which is the last of the webinar series, is Meet the Soil Regen Pros. And so this is where a number of us that are consultants are going to talk about our businesses and what we do. And it's a good opportunity for you to be able to ask questions of us. What's it like to be like a day in the life of a consultant? And just as a reminder, if you missed any of the webinars, the previous ones, that you can access the replays at webinar.soilfoodweb.com. So I highly suggest if you did miss 1, 2, or all of those, definitely go out and take a look at those webinars. They're really, really good. Okay, next slide, please. So in our topics today, we're going to do a quick introduction of our panel. So we've got consultants that are going to be talking today in the panel. And then we've got a poll that we always run with our webinars. And so we want to hear a little bit from you about where your interests lie. And then we've broken it up into 2 parts. So we have Meet the Soil Regen Pros Part 1, which will have Renald and Keisha and Casey talk about their businesses. And then we'll do a quick Q&A after that. And then we'll get into the promotion, what the current offer is. So the offer did end on the 25th, but we do have an extension for 3 days on the current offer. And then we'll have the Meet the Soil Regen Pros Part 2, which myself and Todd will actually talk about our businesses. And then we'll end with a Q&A, that you can ask questions about what you saw in our presentations. And so we are expecting that today's webinar will go about 120 minutes. And in our panelists today, we got Renald Flores, who owns FloresSens Systems, and we got Keisha Wheeler from Biological Compost Producer from the Catalyst BioAmendments and a soil food web consultant, and Casey Ernst, Biological Compost Producer and soil food web consultant as well from Catalyst BioAmendments. We've got Todd Harrington, consultant that is the Harrington's Organics out in Connecticut. And then myself, soil food web consultant, Sprouting Soil, and I've now relocated up to Oregon. So no longer in Cali, I'm actually up in Oregon. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So we're going to launch this quick poll, and should take you just a few seconds to be able to answer it. It's just one question, and it's which of the following best describes you? A farmer, grower, ag professional, an environmental advocate, both of them, or neither? And thank you for taking part in our poll. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and I think moving into part 1 of the Meet the Soil Regen Pros. Oh, before we get there, we want to be able to answer your questions. So if you can, please type your questions that you want panelists to be able to review in the Q&A section. So there's a chat box and a Q&A. Try to get your questions to the Q&A. If you put your questions in the chat, they will probably get missed or may get missed and won't get into the actual questions for the panelists today. Okay. Next slide, please. So we have Meet the Soil Regen Pros Part 1, and Renald is going to start us off. So Renald.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Mm-hmm. So, well, yeah, FloresSens system is the company that I've created a couple of years ago after having been through the whole soil food web curriculum. That was a clear igniter for my current business. So yes, we were focusing on providing hands-on solutions to farmers and all those land stewards. Next slide, please. So the company is based out of Switzerland because I happened to be working there some time ago. And basically our operations are, we started to work in Europe with large-scale farmers. And well, as of today, we are now broadening our operation to South America. And as of today, a couple of work starting in Peru. Next slide, please. So yes, we are focusing on large scale because we realized that when we talk about regenerative agriculture and soil health, the bulk of the work is to be done, I mean, at least from our perspective, at large scale. We had some work on small scale and permaculture size, but well, we found out that yeah, there is a massive work to be done there. Basically, how to transition from well, conventional agriculture to organic, and there's a couple of hurdles down that road. Would that be on the knowledge base? What is soil food web? What are we looking at? And then also operational hurdles, how to include these tools in an existing system, such as the one we can see at large scale. So how do we include those soil regeneration skills with the existing machinery, with the existing operations, with the local staff? I mean, depending on where you are in the world, well, we don't have the same kind of capacity to grasp new concept as the one as we're working on. The soil microbiology being at the root of soil health and plant health. Next slide, please. So we have three main blocks, and well, we are slowly moving towards an extra block. So we are focusing on deploying the soil food web approach that also include applied science. Because science in microbiology and soil health has a lot to offer, existing already, but how do we apply it on land, right? So this is our goal, this is our purpose at FloresSens system. So looking at how do we do that? Well, it's the whole set that you would be learning in the soil food web school, such as, well, what are the microbes about? How do you assess your soil or ourselves? And then the fourth block that we are now including, such as soil health services, that we will then, I'll touch base on that a little later. Next slide, please. So yes, as of today, we have a couple of ongoing big work. The biggest one is the one we have in the north of Europe, in Latvia. So this is a 60 hectares trial out of a 5,000 hectares plot. And then we started to work on avocado production plant in Spain, and then in Austria, both at cereal growing, corn growing, and then market garden, smaller scale. So that's what it is in terms of new project. Has the development of new project. We have now started to see if we can work in the UK. A couple of people willing to settle grapes, grapes growing for winemaking, Greece with olive oil, and then other people in Spain willing to reforest, plant trees in their land. And a couple of new projects coming up. Peru, now we are engaging in working with quinoa growers or kiwicha growers, 120 agricultures, and probably a program with the World Bank and the local authorities for agriculture. So we are pretty busy. Next slide, please. So yeah, well, what are our days about? Well, of course, it's related to the seasons. And well, off season, we enjoy kind of a slower tempo moment to see if we can have new projects and also continue following up on our ongoing project. Well, you know, from one season to another, we're gonna see what goes right, what goes wrong, and then we just monitor and replan. Same thing with compost making and compost tea making. We are continuously supporting farmers and engaging and then encouraging farmers to make their own compost themselves, depending on their context, obviously. A couple of hurdles there. And then compost tea and compost extract, would that be the setup itself in terms of machinery, and then the follow-up in recipes, for example. So we also now offering, because of this whole pandemic story, that we couldn't travel that much, so now we are also offering a hands-on online training for farmers. I mean, we prefer to be face-to-face, but with what we have experienced today, well, we had to adjust. On season, of course, we are in the fields doing the job. That meaning, like, well, following up on the compost that we've created with the farmers, the machinery for compost tea, and then monitoring what's the correlation with the harvest and then the soil food web itself. We want to be sure that we have a hand on what's going on in terms of soil health. Next slide, please. Yeah, that was it.
All right, thanks, Renald. I'm sure we're going to get. I already seen quite a few questions coming in. All right, we're going to hand this over to Keisha and Casey about Catalyst bioamendments.
I felt like that was our cue.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm Keisha Wheeler.
I'm Casey Ernst. We are just recent graduates of the Soil Food Web consultant training program. We're also co-owners and operators of a biological composting company, Catalyst Bioamendments. Yeah, I think for us, as we spend a lot of time just making microbes seen, getting people to understand that they're there. We sell a product and people are literally going to put that under a microscope. So we want to make sure that people know what they're looking at as well. So next slide.
All right. So usually we're presenting about our compost lot. So I wanted to make sure that it was photographed here. Everything is still going well at Catalyst Bioamendments. Our lot is full. That picture's from just a few days ago. I saw a question pop through about how is it that we deal with the laws around composting in the state. And what you can see in that photo there is adjustments and different things that we've been doing to our lot to make sure that our water drains properly, to make sure that we have plenty of space, that we're far enough back from the creek that we operate next to. Our job is looking a lot more like dealing with the rules that are put on us and making sure that we are conducting ourselves in the best way that we can in order not to have any runoff off of our lot, and also just making sure that our compost processes are on point. In the beginning, when we were making compost, we spent a lot of time just trying to figure out how we were doing what we're doing. So over the past few years, we've been redefining our systems, figuring out how to do it a little bit more efficiently. And so now we have more compost than we can sell. The story was before we were making about 300 yards a year, and we would sell out so quickly that that's really all we were doing, was gathering materials, making compost and selling compost. But you can see in the picture on the right, now we are spending most of our time on marketing. Next slide, Sammy. And getting information out for our customers. One thing we've noticed is as we need to engage in the market and find more people to use our product, we need to let people know not only how to use it, but what's inside. So a lot of our year has been focusing on our new website, catalystbioamendments.com. You can find it. And there's lots of information on there. What microorganisms look like, how do you make compost extract, how do you make compost tea? It's all simple, but it's been huge for us just to be able to attract more clients, bring more people in, and to help them know how to use the product more efficiently. Next slide, please.
And, we've been able now to kind of expand. We've hired on a couple of new people to our company, and we're just using that. A lot more of our time now is just in outreach, going to farmers markets, and we just recently hitting stores, like going to every store we can, seeing if we can get our product on the shelf.
Shelf stability too.
Oh yeah, and shelf stability
that was
testing.
A long study.
Yeah, trying to make sure bags are correct, and labeling, and that's another regulation nightmare, as well as what you can actually put on a label. So yeah, our jobs have changed a lot since the compostings. We got the composting lot dialed in. Next slide.
We still are doing our microscope all the time, not just to look at our compost, but now we have a lab. So we have people sending us samples from really all over the country. And then we work with our clients now too. So not only am I taking pictures and sharing those and trying to stay active online with people, but we just have samples coming in like crazy. So we find that to make this work, we have to wear a lot of hats, and, consulting looks different for each person. We get a lot of letters, once you get to the Soil Food Web School, how easy is it to create a business or find a job? And if you're willing to do a lot of different activities, which is something that we really like to do, we find that our time is absolutely full of microbe work at this point. Next slide, please.
So we've even started injecting and spraying compost extracts and teas on like a variety of different things we never thought we would be doing. A lot of, injecting in landscapes, and just backyard gardens, as well as orchards and larger scale farms as well.
We also find it's been interesting because I imagine if we would start working immediately with large scale farmers, which we do, but we've been calling in really folks that care a lot about microbiology, but are just working with their own lawn, their own landscape, their own little piece of bare ground. And so it's been interesting and challenging to work with so many different plant species. Like you can see in these pictures, there's probably, 200 different species of plants, and they all have their own issues. And so where I was kind of preparing to work with, say, corn, we've got the surprise of we're working with everything now. So we're spending a lot of time just learning about plants and learning, how these processes work with different species of plants. Next slide. And this is I'm hoping to be able to update you guys in a few months or a year. This project is really, really exciting. And it doesn't show from these photos really what we're up against, but this is 16 acres of bare ground close to LA. There is nothing but sand and some native plants, very few growing around. And we've been tasked with the job of creating an ecosystem, bringing plants in. And I mean, right now we are working with biology, but as you can see, so much of it's just covering the ground and getting some plants to grow. So when those big rains come and erosion happens, that we're stopping mudslides. So it's really interesting where the consulting has taken us. Again, where we thought it would just be, how do you make compost? How do you make tea? How do you apply it? Those aren't our issues at all. It's like, how do you get the biology to stick in sand when it's been dry for a whole year?
It's completely arid climate that doesn't get rain at all.
Yeah, it's been really challenging and really exciting. And so the journey just keeps unfolding and taking us to new places. And like so much of our work, I know this is silly, but it's just, mulch is beautiful. Talking to landowners and getting them not to pull every bit of organic material that falls off of their bushes onto the ground out. That's really what we do almost every day of our work. Next slide.
And just, I don't know. It's just, we like the work that we're doing. It's always evolving. It's always changing. You run into new situations that you don't know how to handle all the time, which is kind of exciting for us. So
you get to travel, meet micro people.
And just get to watch it, your actions change a space over time. You're constantly learning. You never stop. I don't know.
We do have lots of compost to work with, so that's another real perk of the job. Be a biological compost producer, and you will have wealth in the form of microbes.
Yep.
I think that's all for us, Brian, or Sandy.
Great. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and head to here. And thank you, Keisha and Casey and Renald, for your guys' presentations. So we've got some questions around, what does it take to become a consultant and stand up a business? So the first question is from Renee. And Renee asks, I'm guessing this will be answered throughout, but what are the biggest challenges in starting your business as a consultant and the challenges you have to overcome with potential customers? This is a question I get a lot from people that are looking to become a consultant. It's definitely weighs on their mind. So panelists, anybody want to step in first?
Yeah. Well, sharing my experience, the first hurdle has been just to have an interest from the farmer about, what are you guys talking about? Soil food web? What is that? Soil microbiology? Oh, isn't that just about fertilizers and chemicals and stuff like that? Right. So it takes a whole energy to carry this knowledge in their context. Then the second hurdle has been, to adjust such a beautiful and massive know-how inside their operations. I mean, for myself, I'm working at large scale. So when I came in, I remember my very first experience. I had to just look around with all the machinery available and see how I would just use those tools with this purpose of bringing the microbiology back into the soil. And again, size matters. Yes, of course. When you deal with 1 hectare, it's not the same as when you deal with 60 hectares. So what did that take me? So would you stay in business and continue working? Well, I would just say passion or craziness. I don't know which one to do. This constant idea and drive to adjust, find out what works better. How can we adjust in the context of machinery breaking and then the season going? Can we seed? Can we coat seeds? If the protocol has been respected in terms of producing a compost tea. So that takes a lot of patience and a lot of dedication to constantly repeat the same things till the moment when the farm owner or the agronomist or whoever on the farm suddenly tells you, oh, I just bought myself a book on soil microbiology. Now I understand what you mean. So yeah, passion and dedication. And then I'd say as well, what helped me very much, it's the the work, the trial work that we have been asked to do under the Soil Food Web school. So when you finish, you have to do an actual regeneration program. So I enjoyed that that opportunity then to write about it. So I kind of created an in between scientific paper that would just bring the whole knowledge of what we've learned, and then the result, the actual pragmatic result. And after I published that, so people were to give me more credits, if I may. So it was about to bring more visibility of and more pragmatic visibility of what are the results. Results for farmer are key. And we're talking about efficiency and money, and then somehow their survival in the business, while looking at whether or not they can implement such techniques. So that's it for me.
Great, thanks, Renald. Anybody else want to take on?
Sure. I feel like one of the challenges for me is to keep it simple and not just flood people with information. I realized a few days ago, I was writing to a client and I was listing all the benefits of the soil food web. And I realized at some point that I looked like just a crazy snake oil salesman. And I was like, you know, I had to tell myself if I was listing the benefits of water, it would be really similar. You know, these organisms are necessary in our living systems, but I tend to just avalanche people with information. And like Renald says, they're just scratching their head trying to keep up. And so learning to keep it really simple and to explain in a way that, you know, grows the information in people's minds and helps them understand slowly and not get overwhelmed has been a real challenge for me.
Agreed.
Excellent.
Todd, you want to add?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the most important things for me with consulting is having a really good relationship with my clients. That I really enjoy. That's one of the most important things for me. If I find or feel that it's right from the get-go doesn't feel right, I'll refer somebody else. I try to nip it in the bud right from the get-go. And I think another thing also is it's really, really important to plan out a process in a program with your clients. You know, just kind of, it's, I don't like to be ad lib. I like to use the testing that we do at the beginning as like a blueprint, a roadmap that we can plan out for the next 2 or 3 years. Because as everyone knows here, it's a process, not necessarily an event when you're dealing with biology, ecology, and chemistry. So I think those are really important. And like Keisha said, you know, keeping it simple with the client is really important. I had a client recently that just didn't really know a lot about what she was doing on her farm, but she had purchased a farm recently down south. And I said, you know, let's just keep it simple. You know, I'll deal with the technical part of it, and we'll just, you know, work at the, you know, keep it simple at the beginning, because it gets really overwhelming when you start talking about, you know, the bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, the microorthopods, start talking about the chemistry, the sap testing. It can be quite overwhelming to some folks. And so I think it's important to, and I think fourthly would probably be is be really creative with your clients, because there's many ways we can save them money by working locally, sourcing out locally. And I think that's really important nowadays with the way things are going with inflation. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. And you guys hit all the high notes for me, but there's probably just 2 other things I would add in that could be challenges. One of the challenges is going to be having the confidence to tell your client when you don't know something. You know, they're hiring you as an expert, but that sometimes their impression about your expertise goes into a lot of their farm management practices. Like you may get a client that is growing avocados as an example, but you don't have any experience in avocado growing. You have the experience in the soil food web and the soil biology and so forth, but sometimes they'll make the impression that you know everything about avocado growing that they know, or at least you should be an expert in that. And so having the confidence to make those delineations and saying, hey, look, you know, you are the expert in growing avocados. I'm the expert in the soil biology aspect of it. It's a partnership that we have to develop with each other, and just having the confidence to be able to, to do that is a key thing, I think.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
And the one other challenge I get sometimes too, especially in dealing with more large scale agriculture, you have a lot of invested parties that may be part of this project. So your client, the actual farmer, the person that's hired you, maybe, hey, I'm bought in, I want to go down this road. But you may have agronomists or PCAs or irrigation managers, or the list goes on, and they may not be fully bought on to what you're trying to do. And there can be a misunderstanding about the path we're trying to take and the path that they're trying to take. And so having good communication early on, and something I think that was brought out in Renald and Keisha Casey's presentation was education. I have found that when I can be really successful is early on, I convince my client that we need to sit down and have a kind of level set understanding about what we're trying to do and what is the role of the soil food web, and really dive down and just do a primer on soil biology. So everybody gets that basic understanding. Okay, right, here's how microbes are important, and here's why we have to pay attention to these management practices that we do. And doing that kind of work early in the life cycle of your engagement is key, I think. Okay, I think we get that question good. Any last follow-ups before we move on to another question?
We nailed it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Another question around being a consultant, and this is starting. So when you started as consultants, which strategies did you use to reach your potential clients? This was a question from Monica.
We were really lucky because we'd already been owning catalysts and working on building a client base and speaking with our customers for many years. So they just kind of came as soon as as soon as we were able, they were ready. So for us, the compost lot was the real method of getting clients.
Oh, it's a lot of sharing information too. Like, I don't know, like a lot of people like to be very guardy over some of their knowledge. And it's like, honestly, you're going to interest more people if you actually get them thinking about what it is you're doing. So sharing knowledge, talking to people, just getting out there and like just talking about this stuff to any person you can, which kind of becomes it can be an issue as well when you see people glaze over. But it's really helpful when trying to just get yourself out there, learn your own confidence and how you speak about this stuff is just start talking, start sharing information, go to classes and talk to other people. I don't know, it's get out there and just start doing it, really.
Yeah,
I agree. I think go ahead, Renald.
I want to make a point here that the fact that I am in the soil food web network is helping me every other day. I have people contacting me because I'm appearing in the soil food web consultant database on their website. So that's a clear helper. And then repeating what Keisha has said, you get yourself visible. Who are you and how confident are you? And I mean, farmers know their stuff, of course, and you also have to adjust your vocabulary, what you talk about, because then the trust will be built on that. And of course, I would say self-confidence, right? It's like the go do it. So when you're facing anyone that is interested, it's just like not telling, oh, maybe, I don't know, perhaps. It's like, yes, we will find a solution. And that's, for me, that what has worked.
Right. Yeah, I think when I first started off, the way that I went about getting clients early on was a lot of outreach. Going and finding grower groups in my local area, and letting them know who I was, and if it was an opportunity for me to come in and to give a 15-minute discussion, half hour, 1 hour long, presentation on the soil food web, because there's a lot of interest right now, in particular around soil health and soil biology. It's becoming part of the zeitgeist. This is a common kind of talking point that you see in a number of news stories and the trade discussions, but there's a massive lack of knowledge, and so there's a need for that knowledge. And if you are comfortable educating and providing those kind of outreach communications to those different grower groups, you'll more than likely get a number of inquiries about your consulting business, what your rates are, what do you do, and that will turn into clients. And that was for me early on, how I got most of my clients was through that aspect of it. And then that's transitioned now into a lot of word of mouth. So you're helping a farmers talk, their neighbor or their friend, hey, go reach out to Brian. He's the one that helped us with the soil biology aspect of it. And so I'm getting a lot more referrals in that sense from my clients and their friends or neighbors and things like that. Todd.
Well, I got to tell you, you can learn a lot just by doing. And I think being the veteran here, I've had the opportunity to learn just a boatload from being out in the field and starting this back in the 90s. But like you said, Brian, I think I got really involved in organizations like NOFA. I helped write the standards for organic land care. And then I did a lot of conferences back in the day with Acres USA. And, coming from the Hort end of it, I was like, wow, these people are really advanced in agriculture. And I really networked with a lot of really cool people. And that's, I think, where I originally met Elaine back in the 90s was Acres USA. So, these and there's a lot of great organizations in different areas of the United States that you can get involved in. And the United States Compost Council just had a seminar in Texas, and there's a lot of great people in that organization, Oregon Tilt. I think just being part of those organizations and going to those workshops and meeting those people is one really good way to introduce yourself. And I think the other thing people realize, if you have a real passion and love for what you do, I can't imagine doing anything else but this. And I think people realize that when they meet you. And I think the last thing I would say is that I think I enjoy working with other consultants because I've been doing it for so long. I can save them a lot of headaches. Even with my clients, I can really kind of speed up the process and avoid them making all the mistakes that I made back in the day. So I think, as consultants, we can really benefit our clients in that way.
Yeah, that's the value we add, right? Which is to help them not necessarily go through the school of hard knocks, and make them much more efficient. It really comes down to, especially in any farming situation, horticulture situation, it really boils down to how profitable can they be in the businesses that they're trying to run, and are you adding value or not? And that's really to kind of keep mindful when you're acting as a consultant. Completely agree.
I want to add two little things here. I will come back to what Keisha said, and then what you said, Brian, about education. I just have set up a simple YouTube channel that is related to my website, and have like early, very easy entering level knowledge of videos putting together of what we're doing. So that has helped very much. And bouncing back to what you just said, Brian, it's like, I have also found that what kind of added value do we bring to a farmer besides the soil food web? Well, for me, it's also engaging in other topics like, have you thought about soil carbon sequestration, the carbon markets? Did you think about the correlation between the soil health, the nutrient available in your soil, and then the actual nutrient content of your crops, right? All this kind of stuff are new ideas that I'd say the mainstream farmer doesn't have the time to think about. So engaging the farmers and the client to new horizons that are absolutely tangible and meaningful, I find.
Right. Well, I think that's spot on in the fact that, the work that we do may open up the door or an opportunity for the farmer to sell their product into a new market for them, right? That they may have been selling very conventional wholesale kind of markets, where now they're making a product that is superior nutrient density, or bricks, or in like the wine growing, the terroir and things like that. And that can push that client into a marketplace that may provide better margins for them or open more avenues for them to be able to sell their products. So I agree. There's some tangential benefits that we can provide to our clients as well.
Yeah, and then like recently I started relationship with a guy who's doing bread. He's a French guy in the US, and now he's settling back in France. And his whole idea is like how nutritious my wheat is. And then the idea is like to correlate the same things up to the people's table. So how you have many horizons that are here and that needs to be untapped, I find.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
Another thing,
Okay.
Brian, too, is we, I don't know if we can technically say that food is medicine, but because the way we grow, we farm our soils in such a way that the plants are so much more nutritionally dense that food truly is medicine. And I'm working with a lot of clients now that are working with the pharmaceutical industry, and we are growing plants that are far superior than your conventional plant just because of doing the soil food web process. So, right. And that's really exciting because that's really, really starting to take off. And I know Renald over there is probably dealing with the same kind of thing with, the way that we grow plants biologically is that food truly is medicine. And a lot of the industries are looking at that.
Well, I
almost
think
say the soil is medicine.
Yeah, true. It's the foundation that starts that, right? And I think that there is emerging technologies that are going to be wrapped around the ability for consumers to be able to understand the nutrient density of the foods that they're eating. And that will be a big switch in the market where the consumers are going to start demanding, I want food that is much more nutrient dense, and I'm going to choose the products that have that. And we know from the work that we're doing that when you have a optimal soil food web, you're providing all the nutrient cycling and immune response to those plants, that they metabolize in a much different way than those conventional plants, and they are able to become much more nutrient dense. And that will again be a translation back to the farmers. They're going to say, hey, look, I want to be on board in these systems because it does open up those markets.
Yeah, when these plants are producing secondary metabolites, and they have that defense mechanism that becomes totally proactive and resistant, then we become exactly the same thing when we eat that food, which is
exactly
direct
food is medicine.
Yeah. And then I would say that it's really engaging the farmer's mind in correlating things. So I mean, it's not just a linear relationship. We're talking about soil health. And down the line, it's food, nutrient, dense, quality. And then at the end of the day, as Todd says, it's like about human health, right? We are supporting, indeed, making the farmer feel that we are actually bringing an added value in such a complex dynamic of multiple environments, like the soil food web. Yes, we are providing a service, but then we engaging the farmer itself to be these detective, these scientists of his own system, and that I found that it makes a difference with all the rest of the traditional consultant or agronomist that can come on the farm and just want to sell you chemicals and then already made products.
Yep, agreed. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on from Q&A, and we're going to get into a brief discussion about the current promotion, and then we're going to go to our part 2, and we'll hear from Todd and myself, and then we'll follow up with another Q&A session. Okay, so we have the promotion that we're running in January, and so we're actually offering a 3-day extension, and so this is going to be available through January 31st, and there are a few spots still left in this promotional series. So if you're very interested, it would be time to get into that. Oh, I think Keisha, you guys might not be on mute. There you go. And in this promotion, you're going to see a short video that's going to talk about the 2 different packages that we're offering at this promotional period. So let's go ahead and start that video and see you guys after the video. And panelists, if you could put yourself on mute.
This month, we're presenting our biggest bundle with the biggest savings. With the Consultant Kickstarter bundle, you can register for the Soil Food Web Foundation courses with Dr. Elaine Ingham for just $38.70, saving over $1,100 through October 21st. You'll also get Stage 1 of the Consultant Training Program totally free, saving a further $15.40. That's 26 hours of mentor time dedicated to helping you make your own biological compost and develop your microscopy skills to the standard required to qualify as a certified Soil Food Web Lab technician. You'll also get 2 free bonuses with this offer: the Introduction to Permaculture course by Graham Bell and the all-new Soil Sponge Regeneration workshop with Dee Dee Purshouse, saving a further $500. This is the biggest discount bundle we've offered with a total value of over $7,000, for which you'll only pay $38.70, saving you over $3,100. That's 45% off. There are limited places available with the Consultant Kickstarter bundle, so please don't delay. In Foundation Course 1, you'll take a deep dive into the science and methodology that underpins the Soil Food Web approach, which was developed by Dr. Elaine Ingham over the last 4 decades. You'll study the history of soil on planet Earth and how the agricultural practices we've been using in the last 100 years have degraded our soils to the point where we now only have around 60 harvests left, according to the United Nations. You'll learn about the solution to many of the problems that are familiar to farmers all over the world today. Problems like diminishing soil fertility, pest and disease pressure, low crop yields, drought, flooding, compaction, and soil erosion. Regenerative agriculture can address all of these problems. You'll be introduced to regenerative practices like no-till and the use of cover plants. You'll also learn about the 4 major groups of microorganisms that drive soil regeneration and how the process can be accelerated by restoring the microbial community or soil food web to your client soils. Dr. Elaine will present a number of case studies from around the world that she has worked on personally. Here you'll see some of the amazing results that have been achieved using the soil food web approach.
In Foundation Course 2, you will learn all about the importance of biological compost and how it's very different to regular compost. When most people look at compost, they only see a means of delivering nutrients to their plants, so they think about how much nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and other elements are in the compost. When we look at biological compost, we see a means of inoculating the soil with beneficial microorganisms so that the soil ecosystem can start to function again, providing plants with a continual supply of nutrients. This is kind of like teaching someone to fish so they can feed themselves for life, as opposed to just giving them a single meal. In this part of the training, you will learn how to make biological compost using various starting materials to create a recipe that will produce results. You'll learn how to monitor and control moisture levels, aeration, and temperature in order to ensure that beneficial microorganisms are multiplied, while disease-causing organisms are destroyed or become dormant. You'll also learn about the various types of equipment that can be used at different scales, and you'll learn about the different ways in which biological compost can be applied to the soil. In Foundation Course 3, you'll study Dr. Elaine's methods for making liquid biological soil amendments. Compost extracts are used as a soil drench, delivering microbes deep into the soil profile, where they can interact with the plant's root system. Compost teas are applied to the plant's foliage, where they form a protective barrier against foliar diseases. In time, as your soil biome becomes more diverse and vigorous, your plants and trees may be entirely covered with beneficial microbes without having to continually apply them.
In Foundation Course 4, you'll focus on 4 major groups of microorganisms in the soil food web: bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes. You'll learn how to use a compound microscope to identify and quantify these microbes so that you can really see what's going on in your compost and in the soil. This will give you the ability to assess the quality of your compost and liquid amendments before you invest all the time and effort that is required to apply them to the soil. You will also be able to monitor the progress of the microbial community in your soil over time, so if something is going wrong, you will know about it before the plants start to suffer. This gives you the opportunity to take remedial action early on in the growing season. In Stage 1 of the Consultant Training Program, you'll be assigned to one of our highly skilled mentors, some of whom are soil food web consultants who run their own businesses supporting farmers to make the transition to the soil food web approach, and others are PhD biologists who have been working closely with Dr. Ingham for several years. You'll work one-on-one with your mentor to develop your compost making and microscopy skills. When it comes to making great biological compost, there are many variables and every situation is different. Our mentors have worked with dozens of students making compost in many different conditions, so they'll be able to help you address some of these challenges that are unique to your location. They'll also guide you to avoid making common mistakes that can cost you lots of time, money, and effort. Your mentor will support you as you develop your skills to the required standard to pass the microscopy proficiency assessment. Achieving this standard will give you the confidence to really know what's happening in the microbial community in your compost and soil. You'll be able to identify and quantify the 4 major groups of microbes in the soil in about an hour or less. Once you successfully pass the microscopy proficiency assessment, you can elect to be listed on our website as a certified soil food web lab tech, which means that you can assess soil samples for other farmers and growers in your region. You'll have a total of 26 hours of mentor time, so you can arrange Zoom calls and exchange emails with your mentor whenever you feel you need help. Our mentors work together as a team, and there's lots of diverse experience and knowledge between them, so you'll have access to a great deal of support.
You'll also have access to the 2 bonus courses. In the Introduction to Permaculture course, you'll learn from internationally respected teacher, author, and lecturer in permaculture, Graham Bell. This is a series of 18 lectures and quizzes where you will take a deep dive into this amazing design system that can be applied when designing your home, garden, farm, business, or community. Permaculture is all about being in balance with the planet and is an ideal tool to have in your bag whenever you're considering making a change. The Soil Sponge Regeneration Workshop is delivered by educator and author Dee Dee Pershaus. This 5-session course is all about regenerating the soil sponge for flood, drought, and wildfire resilience. It builds on the successes of innovative land managers around the world who are saving huge sums in damages from extreme weather events and crop diseases, while restoring the dignity and profitability of farming. Dee Dee teaches participatory workshops both in person and online, helping to show the nested relationships between soil health, human health, water cycles, and climate resiliency.
So just to recap, the Consultant Kickstarter bundle comprises the Soil Food Web Foundation courses with Dr. Elaine Ingham, where you get to study the theory and application methods behind the Soil Food Web approach, and that all-important 26 hours of mentor time in Stage 1 of the Consultant Training Program, designed to help you develop your compost making and microscopy skills. You'll also get the 2 free bonuses, the Introduction to Permaculture course with Graham Bell and the Soil Sponge Regeneration Workshop with Dee Dee Pershaus. This bundle is ideal if you want to kickstart your new career as a soil food web consultant. Once you have completed the foundation courses in Stage 1 of the Consulting Training Program, you will be well positioned to complete your certification and be listed as a soil food web consultant on the school's website. With these programs, you'll be on the path to a meaningful and impactful career as the soil food web consultant or biological compost producer.
Okay, thanks for watching our video on our promotion. And now we're going to move into part 2. So we're going to hear from Todd first. So Todd, take it away. And Todd, you're on mute, just to let you know.
There we go, unmuted. So my name's Todd Harrington. I've been involved in the Soil Food Web organization as a Soil Food Web advisor. Boy, I think Elaine started it probably in the late 90s, early 2000s. We had quite a number of folks back then as Soil Food Web advisors. We went through a certificate program, not quite as advanced as the one that we have now, but we did have a pretty decent group of folks back then, and in many different organizations or different industries, from agriculture to horticulture. And we kind of formed a group called SGI with Elaine, and we were consultants basically back then, sharing our knowledge, our knowledge and our experiences with each other, working on projects all around the United States. I went to school at Stockbridge School of Agriculture back in the late 80s, got my degree there. But before that, I worked for my dad as a landscaper in the summertime, and actually started going to college for civil engineering, of all things. After about 2 years of realizing I didn't want to be inside drafting, because I'd always be looking out the window every time it was nice out, I decided, I really need to work outside somehow. So, and I also had spent all my summers working with my dad, who had a big landscape company. So we did install, build, maintenance, so on and so forth. So after 2 years of college, I took off a year and a half and worked for a couple of different horticulture companies. And then I went to school up at Stockbridge. And that's when that kind of really kickstarted my career in agriculture and in horticulture. And one of the projects that we had to do in my senior year in college was to come up with a company name if we were wanting to start our own business. And so I came up with a name, something to do with, that was kind of even back then in the late 80s, I was into the organic thing. And so I came up with a name called Organic Care. I thought it was a pretty cool name, but since then I've had to change it a few times. But if you want to move on to the next slide. So yeah, background, went to Canton High School, University of Massachusetts, graduated in '87. I actually was a professional skier. I skied the USSA until I had the opportunity to make the World Cup. And then I skied professionally on the Pro Mogul Tour for a number of years. And then I decided not to completely destroy my body. And I spent some time in Switzerland, actually, Renald. I spent about 4 years there working for a group in Port of Soleil, which you might know that area. Yeah, it's a great area, and it's between Switzerland and France. And so for the next 3 winters, I was there as an extreme skiing instructor. And I had a blast. I really did. And then I worked in the summer times with my business. I started my business, I think it was about 91. I started my company, but I took the winters off and spent it in Switzerland. Beautiful, beautiful country. I'm envious of Renald. And then I, like I said, landscaping tree care company, started my own business in about 91 called Organic Care. And then I changed it to Harrington's Organic Land Care. So you can go ahead and move on. So like I said, I started off as Organic Care in '87. I registered the name in '91, and it was a horticulture business. I maintained landscapes, both commercially and residentially. And I offered mostly treatments. We didn't do mowing and blowing like general landscapers do. We were kind of a specialty company. I don't want to say we were competing with the ChemLawn type companies out there, but we were the alternative. And even back then, it was really starting to catch on. People just were, looking for alternatives to managing their landscapes instead of using the harsh chemicals. Next. I bought my first building probably in '91. It looks like, yeah, somewhere around there, 90, 91. So this was my first building. It's about 5,600 square feet. There's offices, there's bay space. I have a tea center, compost tea center in there. We do our vermicomposting inside year round. We keep some of our trucks in there, and I have about 3.5 acres. So, we have bins in the back that we bring in our feedstock, and we custom make our own recipe for our vermicomposting operation there. And then we run 4 trucks out in the field doing the general maintenance, for the local company. Next. As you can see, this is a general, what I call compost extract center, compost tea center. I've set up probably about 15 of these or more around the country and overseas. This is what I would consider like a medium-sized one. If you can see in the foreground, there's a couple tanks there. Those are 1,000-gallon tanks. The center tank is actually a water tank, and that is what we use to structure our water before we actually extract our vermicompost. The 2 side tanks are actually the batch tanks, and the extractor is to the right of that. You'll see someone actually lifting up like a screen. That's actually the input hopper where we'll put our different recipes in there, mostly vermicompost. Sometimes we use Ramiel ground up wood chips, so it's more fungal dominant. But we come to mix and match our different materials that go in there, and then we extract it. And these industrial extractors we actually started manufacturing them because the company that originally made these stopped producing them back in about 2007, I think it was. So we had to actually make more of them ourselves, but they're workhorses. They don't break. They are a little overbuilt, but these industrial extractors, you're not limited by time and volume. So we can actually make about 1,000 gallons in about 30 minutes. And you can change that volume with the spray tips and the amount of pressure going into the actual extractor. So like I said, I have a couple of these set up in different parts of the country. And then there's the vermicompost bin, and that's a flow-through vermicomposting unit that we actually built ourselves because it has hydraulics on it. It doesn't have a cable, so we built a whole bunch of these for our clients. But that is a 4 by 16, so that's about 64 total square feet. And we usually have about anywhere between a half to a pound per square foot. So that you're looking at 30 to 60 pounds of worms is what we usually will keep regeneratively, because what we do is when we harvest at the bottom, then we actually return the worms, because the screener, you can't quite see the screener to the far left corner there, but we have a couple of these trombel screens that are designed for vermicompost screening. So we use these to screen out the material before we extract it. It's kind of like coffee, because we like the particulate size, the 1/8 to a 16th. We use different screens on our trommels so that that material can extract very uniform and very consistent. And so that way we always get the same material, the same biology. It's very consistent because of the particular size on the screening of the castings. But that vermicompost that you see, we build different sizes, and it's kind of like the Holy Grail for our clients. We have very special recipes that we design for our clients based on their soils and their plants that they're growing. So, for example, like the client Adam York that we were on a couple days ago, his recipe is quite a bit different than my recipe because of his soils. Chemistry and biology is different than ours. So we kind of custom build and make the recipe for that client. So they can do everything in-house right there. They can extract it, and they make a liquid extract, which we then will transfer into trucks as just pure extract. And in some situations, we'll actually take that extract and add food to it and aerate it for 12 hours. So it gives us a lot of flexibility as not only an extract, but also as an active. And we're not limited by time and volume. We can just continuously make it. So if you want to go to the next one. So we started holding classes, I think, we probably started holding classes in the late 80s and throughout the 2000s. And I would say 75% of the classes that I held was with Elaine. So we were actually doing the soil food web classes at my place. This is our training room and our conference room. So we have about 20 to 30 people is the capacity that we have in this room, but it's been fantastic. We'd have a 3-day course. We'd have compost tea extract day. Then we'd have a soil food web. And then the last day was microscope. We have a lab downstairs, and everyone would bring their microscopes, and we would assess compost people would bring in. And we also had what was called, which was a lot of fun, we had what was called a tea off. And we invited all the manufacturers of the different companies to bring their brewers, and then we would assess it under the microscope, and we would quantify it. It was a lot of fun. So we did this for a number of years. Unfortunately, when COVID came around, we kind of shut down for a while, but I'm hoping to get back into that in the off season. Next. And there's Elaine. So she was a real asset, a lot of fun to have her there. So she was very actively involved in our workshops at our facility. Next. And like I said, we have a pretty big lab. We were probably one of Elaine's first affiliated labs back in about 2007. And then there's the original one in Oregon with Matt Slaughter. I think he's the original one, and then Paul Wagner in New York. But that was about 2007 when we set up our lab. And this is just us doing, we do a lot of research in-house, and we do a lot of research for our clients doing a quantitative and qualitative test on their compost and their extracts. Next. We manage all parts of different types of businesses. I do, all the sales. I'm a mechanic, kind of a gearhead, so I help with a lot of the repairs. That's really played out well for me with my clients because I'm always on a tractor, a sprayer, taking apart a pump, spray tips, whatever, that's kind of my thing. So I really kind of enjoy hands-on kind of stuff. I help manage payables. I manage employees. I consult with clients. I review a boatload of chemical and biological tests, and then I help design and build programs from these tests with my clients. Next. Like I said, we service both residential and commercial. Residential, commercial, we do some schools, some ball fields, some commercial buildings. We travel sometimes 3 to 5 hours for some of these big commercial projects that are part of projects that I work with some very, very large landscape companies like Brightview. And it could be a 3 or 4 year project, and they could have a budget of anywhere from $500 to $1 million budget just for the compost extract part of the program, which is almost unheard of, but they see the value in it now. And so a lot of these big construction projects have certain requirements in their projects where the contractor has to fulfill the soils that they design. The geotech engineered soils have to fulfill certain biological processes with quantitative biology in it, and they give us about 2 or 3 years to do that. And so sometimes we'll actually go and do the applications for them, and sometimes we train the actual landscape company to do it in-house. Next. As a consultant, I've worked, having an in-house lab has been absolutely paramount for me. My lab manager, Megan, is fantastic, and she helps me with a lot of these projects, doing the quantitative testing, the qualitative testing, and also dealing and working with the chemistry results. Work with landscapers, tree care companies, lots of farmers, golf courses, schools, nursery, cannabis growers, quite a few of them, apple orchards, which I enjoy a lot, vineyards, quite a few pastures over the last few years, and also other professionals that do what I do. A lot of the soil food web students I've worked with and some of their companies, the companies they're working with. I'm doing a lot of research for compost companies and firms that actually manufacture fertilizers, both state and other agencies. We recently were awarded a project with the NRCS through the USDA, doing soil testing for them, biological testing. And I work with equipment manufacturers and also organic production manufacturers like AgriBio, to name just a few. Next. So this popped up, and I guess what is the highlight of my career? And I guess this is probably one of them for sure. Was traveling to the United Arab Emirates in 2001 and meeting the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Rashid and saving their date palm orchards. They at that time they were losing most of their date palms to the red palm weevil. And I don't know if you've ever seen the red palm weevil, but that's a really big bug. I mean, it's probably 1.5 inches to 2 inches in size. And they were. It's interesting because the date palm is kind of a religious symbol, and it's written in the Quran, and they're not allowed to cut them down and disinfect the area. So there was always that potential infection because they couldn't just cull the plants. And so we came in there originally injecting these date palms with medicaments, including insecticides. But at the end of our project, we ended up digging in the ground, digging around the roots, and found that they weren't expanding their tree wells. And so all the roots, the mature trees were growing way beyond these tree wells, and the roots were compacted and compressed and declining. So we increased the tree wells, and then we started sourcing out compost. And ironically, they had the largest compost facility in the world there. I mean, you could walk into these digesters. They were mammoth. And we were like, okay, and they didn't know really what to do with the compost back then. And we ended up finding a really good source to get rid of the compost was these date palms, and it was a win-win. So it was originally it started off as a reactive approach in a reactive project with the injection, but it ended up being a proactive project by using composting, using biology to make the plants resistant to the red palm weevil. So it was really gratifying. And I definitely say that's one of the highlights, which is also the turkey project was very similar. The next one. What does a typical workday look like? Well, I think as Casey, Keisha, and everyone else on this webinar know, it's for me, it's coming in, dealing with, working with my clients, returning phone calls. I can't stand not returning phone calls. So I'm really good about responding to my clients, setting up appointments, reviewing soil tests, chemical tests, biological tests, fixing equipment, paying bills, traveling with to a lot of my clients' locations. It's really a jack of all trades, really, which I enjoy. I really do. It's not one, every day is different. I got to tell you, I really, really enjoy this time off in the standpoint of things slow down here locally. We kind of shut down for a month, and then things start picking up in February and March again. So I spend most of my time now in February, January and February, is traveling, consulting, working with my clients, preparing for the springtime, and it's helping them design and build programs for them. Next. Again, I met Elaine back in the 90s, Acres USA, we talked about already. Started training in 98, became one of the first soil food web advisors back in, I can't see the date there, but I think it was 2000 something there. And 2005, look at that. I even have the plaque there as proof. Next. And that's it.
Great.
So hopefully I got
Thanks,
through the 10 minutes.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, you did good. Good timing. And it's like the comedian. You're a hard act to follow, Todd. So I'm Brian Vagg. I own a company called Sprouting Soil. You can go to the next slide. And a little bit about my story. For me, I worked in the high-tech industry for a number of decades. I was information systems management person. I did a lot of program and project management, and growing things was always my hobby. I grew up on a homestead. My parents, we raised animals, we grew our vegetables and had, fruits and nuts and all that kind of good stuff. So I was very familiar with growing systems, growing up in that environment. But the career I chose was actually in computers. That's where I really landed. And it was great, but that industry became very commoditized, and I really enjoyed outdoors. And my wife and I, we ended up buying a homestead. And when I was running our homestead, I did it like I was a kid. My parents are very conventional. So we rototilled, we applied herbicides, we applied, fertilizers and pesticides and those types of things. Very, very conventional in our practices. So when my wife and I bought our homestead, I fell right into that methodology. But now as an adult, I started looking at the labels and these products I was applying and really started worrying about, I'm applying these things to the food that I'm eating. And I was very uncomfortable with that. And plus, I found that year over year, it became harder and harder to manage my homestead. I was having to apply more and more of these products. And it really bugged me. And so I started looking at alternative ways, and I really came about this from permaculture. So I read about permaculture and started to apply those practices, stop spraying the products on my land and doing, multi-species planting and things like that. And we started to see a dramatic change in our homestead. But I really still didn't understand the mechanisms of why the things that I was doing were working, and why was I seeing so much of a good response from those plants. And I came across a book called Teaming with Microbes from Jeff Lowenfels. And in that, Elaine writes the foreword. And I literally read the foreword, and I remember having this epiphany moment of, wow, that just connected a whole bunch of dots for me. And it's only, her foreword, I think, is like 5 pages long. And I looked up online and I found, you know, some YouTube videos of some of the talks she was giving. And I was like, okay, this is something I need to learn more about. And for me, it was still a hobby and a passion. Well, I became, you know, rightly obsessed with how do I change the soil biology on my homestead and grow wonderful food. And I really just started throwing a lot of my energy into understanding this. And then I came to another realization, which was, you know what, I think I'm finished with my computer career. This is something I want to do full time. As I was starting to see the successes of my homestead, I was, you know what, I have a passion to go out there and help other folks learn this and start to transform their own operations. And so that's when I went into the Soil Food Web School. I became a consultant, you know, became a member of a great group of folks that lived in Northern California doing the same kind of work. Keisha and Casey are part of this group. We created a nonprofit called the Sierra Soil Biology Association. And it was just fantastic to have a bunch of like-minded folks doing the same thing. And I left my high-tech, you know, career and opened my doors as a soil food consultant and haven't looked back. It's been a fantastic journey of learning about the soil food web, learning about different farming operations and landscaping and all those other things. Next slide, please. So, you know, our business focus, this is something that was, you know, I think every single one of us have talked upon, which is wearing many hats and really applying our knowledge to many different industries. You know, so as my consultancy business, lab services, Todd mentioned this, it's bread and butter. It's something that you really need to have a pulse on of taking the microbial assessments. And so I do a lot of lab work. I spend a lot of time under the microscope, which I thoroughly enjoy. I mean, it's very interesting to see the progression of the work that you're doing and seeing the changes in the microbiology. And then doing the consulting work, meeting and talking with clients. It's fascinating to learn about the individual, your clients' businesses. You know, I now know a lot more about how almond operations work and vineyards and landscape companies and all the clients that I interact with. I'm gaining a bunch of knowledge about those industries and how they work. And I think that's just fascinating. For me, I'm very much a learning junkie. I love to learn new things. I also offer remediation services as part of my business. So I do brewing. I make compost teas and extracts. I have a spray rig and I do spraying. I do deep zone injections. And I would say that for me as a business doing those things, I apply my remediation services to a lot of my small scale clients. This is going to be more residential, homestead, small market gardens, and things like that. When I start working with my large scale clients, we're typically training them on how to do that work, how to put brewers into their location, doing on-farm composting, how to do the remediation services. So for me, remediation is typically, when I'm doing it, much more small scale. I'm advising my large scale clients on how to set those operations up for them. I've got quite a bit of work too in doing research and studies. There's a lot of folks that want to put out products into the market and they want to understand how does their product actually so doing tests and trials of their product and how the microbial communities get impacted. And then education, doing a lot of outreach. I love to educate folks. And this sometimes is an education that I will give to a client and their operations crew, or I'll be doing a much more general based education, doing webinars and things like that. And so you wear a lot of hats, you know, in this type of work. Next slide, please. And then, you know, a little bit of the day in the life as being a consultant. And Todd nailed it, you know, and so did Keisha, Casey, and Renald. It's every day seems to be different. I really can't think of where I had 2 days that were the same. I mean, really, there is a lot of variability in the work that we do. And I like that kind of variability. It's new, it's intriguing. And so, you know, my day could be working with a microscope. I mean, there are some days we'll have a backlog of microbial assessments that I need to do, and I might be, 8 hours in the microscope in a day. Sometimes it's, a half hour or an hour, whatever it is. Writing reports, for us as consultants, one of the big skills you really need to learn is how to effectively communicate. There's a lot of data that we get access to, and we have to be able to take that data, internalize it, do some analysis of it, and then be able to communicate that back to our clients in a way that it's easy to consume and to understand. So there's a big skill in being able to do that interpretation of the data and provide some kind of conclusions to your clients. I love having calls with my clients. Again, it's just having that relationship. You build these partnerships with your clients, and most of them I consider to be friends or friendly acquaintances, just because the work that we do is impactful to them and they appreciate it, and usually they're great people. I like doing on-site visits. I have clients that are throughout the country, so you do get opportunities to travel and visit those clients in different locations. And doing research. I get challenged all the time from my clients about, hey, I got reached out by the salesman that's selling this product. What do you think? How does this work? Or, we have a challenge or an issue. There's a disease or a pest that's becoming a problem. And there's a lot of research that gets involved in trying to figure out, what is the problem, and then also what are the tools that I can use to be able to remediate that problem. And then business admin, you've got to be able to run your business, so it's going to be, invoicing and billing and doing your books and all that kind of stuff. Okay, next slide. I think that was my last slide, but maybe I have one more. Nope, that was it. Okay. So we've had or heard from the consultants and about their businesses, and what we're going to do is continue on with the Q&A. So I do have a question here, panelists, so you might want to go off mute. And the question is let me just scroll up to it, from Jennifer. And Jennifer asks, if a person is not interested in developing a big consulting business, but rather just a little part-time lab/consultant for the local region, how viable is that model? Are people doing that? Financial costs/benefits. So what you say, you consultants, as far as doing this more on a part-time, small scale kind of way?
Well, my very first idea is like the cost of a microscope is nearly ridiculous. So you can have your own lab at home with a limited early first step investment to be able to produce solid, consistent soil assessment. I see it very possible.
Agreed. Yeah, I think the capital investments to start into this is low. It doesn't take a lot of money to actually do, especially the lab aspect of it. Anybody else?
I think a lot of people, I think a lot of us start off as part-time. I think that's how you start off, is just do it on the side, do it as a part-time thing. And, unfortunately, I don't want to say unfortunately, but in a lot of situations, a lot of times it ends up being more of a full-time gig, just because of the way things are going, I guess, in the industry. It's there's a real need for it. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that. For me, sometimes it is part-time, but the interest I have in it just keeps me working. Like if I have a week off, I'm like, oh, I'm going to get into some microscope work, which is my work. So it's interesting.
Or even when we go on vacation, she's like, we got to stop at this old growth forest real quick. And she's just got a whole backpack full of soil samples. So it's like the work doesn't really ever stop.
Yeah.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but you tend to catch it, and then it consumes. Well, it consumed me anyway.
Right. Yeah, I ran my business as a year and a half part-time while I still worked at my corporate job. I was running my business part-time, and as Keisha mentioned, there's a passion that takes over. So if you truly don't want to grow your business but still keep it small, that's up to you. Really, I think you have the ability. The challenge you may run into is the types of services you may offer. So if you really want to get into spraying and brewing and all those other things, you just have to take care as far as the amount of equipment you're going to buy to the size of a client that you're going to try to service. Those are the things that tend to take a little bit more capital. When I purchased my spray rig, it cost me about $12,000. So, if you're going to make that kind of capital investment, you have to make sure you get a return on it to be able to pay for the rig.
Yeah.
So,
and I think starting small is making sense, because then your client or potential client will ask for more, right? So that means like, okay, I have that soil analysis. What am I supposed to do now? Well, then it's an opportunity for you to maybe have an extra consulting job. And then maybe later at a later stage, just continue on, just as Brian said, gear up, invest a little more when your saving enables it. And then maybe you would end up being a full-time soil consultant, soil food web consultant specialist.
Right. All right, great question. Let's move to this other question. I love this question because this is something that I'm really passionate about in the work that we do. This question is from Jay, and it is, how do you deal with challenging situations, e.g. influence of chemicals around, unknown soils, etc.? And I'll kick this one off. For me, this is probably one of the funnest aspects of my job. Not that I like challenges or problems necessarily, but when you're presented one of these challenges or problem situations, I feel like I'm a detective. You have to take the skills of, okay, well, here's the problem. What are the tools I'm going to use to identify the cause of the problem? A lot of times we'll get wrapped around the axle of the symptom of the problem, but really if you want to solve the problem, you got to find out what's the cause. And so you use tools that you have available to you to get the data that you need to be able to analyze that situation, say, I think this is the cause. Then you'll put together a practice to test that theory that you've got, prove that that is the cause of the problem, and then now put together a remediation package. How are we going to overcome that problem? And it's weird, but I really do think that we become these kind of soil food web detectives as part of our business. Anybody else want to take on that question?
That's fine. Oh, go ahead, Todd.
No, it's okay. I just I talk a lot about forensics in the webinars, right? And that's kind of what you're talking about. And I find that it's really, really a lot of fun to do the investigative work, and also having this time with a lot of different clients and a lot of different soils and a lot of different crops. We've developed these databases, kind of knowing, okay, this particular crop, historically, this is what we normally see. And so because we have all of us as consultants to share that information and those databases, we have a lot of power as a group when it comes to being able to fix these problems and do the forensics work. But it's also very dynamic, right? I mean, it's not like you just fix it and you can walk away. Unfortunately, Mother Nature throws a lot of curveballs with frost down in Florida right now, to climate changes, which kind of, for us, it's kind of exciting because we have to adapt to these constant changes. And as long as you're flexible and you can adapt to these things, you can be very successful.
Yeah, you guys hit on exactly what I was going to say. I mean, the detective work is so much fun. And what's so interesting to me is I'm often finding myself where I'm just like, I feel like I'm over my head in water. But the education that the Soil Food Web School gave me, and the community, like, all these people that you're watching today, and then there's more of us, like everybody's had different experiences and we all come together and help each other. And with the education we have, I mean, I feel absolutely confident calling experts, all down the line. And so, if there's a chemical that I don't understand, or there's some sort of challenge that's presenting itself, I love the detective work and the reaching out to other people to try to find the answers. And it does, like, it really feels like a discovery when you figure it out. And then there is the work of holding it. Like Todd says, it's not a one and done reality. So often it's progressing forward with time, and we're just learning and learning and learning.
Right.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that challenge, well, welcome to farming. That's just the best. Come on,
So
like,
true.
growing food for so many centuries, and along that line, I mean, what I found is that we have also to include the whole historical of, the whole farming history that we've done, right? And just addressing this kind of larger forensic detective work, and then welcome to finding solutions, which is not even like bragging about fixing, right? It's just like having solutions. It's okay, we're going to try that. However, we are not 100% sure, right? Because this is what farming is about. So yeah, welcome to the challenge world of farming.
I don't know if you guys experience the same thing, but when I work with farmers, and now that I've done it for some time, they are some of the best critical thinkers that I've come across. I mean, the amount of variability that's in their systems is huge. I mean, coming from the computer industry, it seemed most things were kind of straightforward. You kind of figured things out and they kind of followed a path. There was always issues or problems that came up. But in farming, it seems like there's an onslaught, never ending set of challenges. And farmers are just really good at just rolling with those punches and figuring things out, bootstrapping themselves and saying, okay, I'm going to change this or change that. And off they go. It really is a joy to work with the farming community.
Yeah, I want to say that these guys are the best do-it-yourself finding solution on the spot. I mean, I'm amazed. That's probably also one of the parts of my job that I like.
Right.
I think one of the biggest challenges for all of us is we live in a toxic world. Mm-hmm. And everything we touch, everything we source out, we're challenged by finding clean feedstock, right, guys? I mean, it's just nearly every project I work on, I come across some situation where it's like, okay, I think we have heavy metal issues here, or we have some contaminant. And so part of that forensic work that we do is actually looking at and finding out if we're dealing with these toxins in the soils, in the plants, in the inputs, in the feedstocks, and being able to make sure that we don't have it in there. And if we do, we have to look at these alternative ways to remediate, phytoremediate, microbial remediate. So there's a lot of benefits and a lot of advantages on what we do when it comes to helping clean up this planet, because we've really done a good job at polluting it, so that's something to be very aware of, especially as consultants.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, let's move on to another question. This is questions from Felicity, and it's, I'm part of a biodiversity group in New Zealand, and we're considering a large project replacing pines with indigenous vegetation in a dryland system. As we replant, reseed a native ecosystem of plants, should we also source native soil biology to support it? Would say you.
We all just say yes in unison. Yes.
Yes. Indigenous microorganisms are key.
Yeah, I mean,
I would expand upon that. Go for it.
I would say definitely, like, you're going to want just make compost in your area. Like Todd said, is sourcing clean materials. So, put your compost pile together, and, all those materials that you're making your compost out of is going to be covered in local biology. You're building a space for this biology to kind of infiltrate into. And so, yeah, I would say definitely when you're planting anything new, get some kind of either liquid extract, tea, or actually putting in solid amendment out there while you're planting, I think is definitely key to having a successful germination and just everything taking root.
Yeah, we've been working with replanting. One of the jobs we're doing, we're replanting a lot of natives, and the people that sell the plants actually warn us all the time because they know we're compost people. That's how we get introduced to them, and they say, no, don't put compost on the natives, they'll die. And we found that that's not quite true. These plants that are native to California, they enjoy the relationship with microorganisms as all plants on the planet do. So yeah, and it is, as you build your inoculum, it takes some time because, like you're saying, these areas have been devastated. So have some of the microbial life. But if you're persistent and you keep at it, and you just make that your intention, you will eventually develop a really nice inoculum that you can use with your plantings, and they just make everything go so much more smoothly.
Yeah. And that, I think, a challenge with the that statement you made about, don't put compost on it or it's going to die. People's experiences with compost, unfortunately, have been some very bad experiences. They're buying products from these reduced waste facilities that are making very anaerobic products that I've seen them kill plants, outright just be, yeah. And then it becomes this kind of mythology of, oh, well, compost is bad for native plants. Not at all. I mean, especially if you're making compost that's fostering all those indigenous microorganisms that are going to make relationships with those native plants anyways. Yeah, you're going to see massive benefits by using those products. Okay, anybody else want to add before we move on? Okay, this question's from Bruce, and Bruce asks, is consulting compatible with running an organic farm full-time, supporting the farm, and then consulting with others? And I think Adam had his presentation was all about that, right? Which was, hey, yeah, you started off just applying these practices to your own farm, but what you learn then could be translated into how do you help all your surrounding farmers? Do you want to make a comment on that,
Todd?
Todd?
What was the first part of that?
The question is consulting compatible with running an organic farm full time, supporting the farm, and then consulting with others?
I see, yeah. I think because of the way things are going in the industry as a whole, products, processes, a lot of folks that are getting into regenerative farming one way or another, either with organic products, with cover cropping, with mob grazing, with soil food web, people are going to start to levitate towards them one way or another because it's a better way. It's not an alternative. It's the future of farming. And there's so much success out there worldwide. You can't ignore it. And not only that, but they see the value financially on how much they can save. They see, like Adam, for example, all his neighbors were like, well, at first they were like, these are a bunch of nutcases, but then they started, realizing they were saving a lot of money, not to mention reducing the use of all these toxic materials in the environment and exposing their family and friends and their neighbors. I think it's a no-brainer, really. And it's a paradigm shift for a lot of these folks, but it's almost by default. I mean, they're just, people are going to levitate towards them, and kind of get ready because it's coming. And at the same time, there's all the other folks that make them look bad. They're just putting a bunch of jungle juice down, or as Elaine would call it, the fairy piss we put down, as and there's no science behind it, when actually there's a lot of science behind it. So it's the future of farming, period. And it's the future of food, and it's the future of health.
Yeah. I think there, like you said, there's a natural transition from once a farmer learns these practices, it sets up their operation, they're making their farm profitable and resilient and all those other things. It's going to draw people to them to ask a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. And for some people, it's gonna be like, no, I'm farming, that's what I want to do, I don't want to consult. But there's others that are like, what, I really want to get into this. I want to be able to share my knowledge and expand this and make a business out of it. And I think there's definitely, like you said, great opportunity for that.
Yeah, and I just realized a couple of days ago how long, some of those topics that we're mentioning today have taken to be now kind of hot and trendy, like the one of the carbon sequestration. It basically took 20 years to have finally people just like saying, yes, there is a relationship between the carbon sequestration, the water holding capacity, and then here we are with a kind of an essential missing chain of the puzzle, the soil microbiology as well. And definitely many people today just like talking about soil health. And then you ask them, what is soil health? Well, most of those have no idea. This is where we are. This is what we are providing.
Okay, anybody else want to add, or should we move to the next question? All right, let's move to the next question. So this one's from Anita. And this one is, can the soil food web be used to remediate compacted urban soils? So, urban environments have, in my opinion, been kind of a desert in food growing systems. In fact, I think there's been a large scale, propaganda is maybe too strong of a word, but to say your yards need to be ornamental only or horticulture and not in food production. But I think there's a big switch in folks now of saying, hey, we want to move to be able to produce our own food. And in doing so, growing highly nutritious food, there's going to be a lot of soils, I think, in urban environments that are in pretty bad shape. Can we go ahead and remediate those urban soils? What say you panelists?
Yeah, so much of the consulting we're doing right now is precisely that. Working in places like LA, Hollywood, where these plots of lands are tiny. People have these itty bitty yards, and we've just been working with client after client, creating great compost, applying extracts and teas, and just really creating vibrant landscapes that are transforming just so quickly. You can look into a great group called Hollywood Orchards, and they're producing food in people's front yards all over Hollywood. And there's, just this big move right now in the cities to start doing exactly what we're doing here, because like you said, Brian, they could be biological deserts, or they could be little biological safe havens, which is precisely what we need in these cities where things are buzzing around. There's still people, birds, cars, things to transfer those beneficial microorganisms around, instead of it just being a compacted bacterial wasteland, so to speak.
Yeah, we actually, there was one project, it was like a turnout, and then they had this brick wall, and then it was this whole island of just concrete rubble and just building materials in downtown Hollywood. And they came out, cleared all the rubble out of the way, and then we came in with compost and extract, injected the whole thing and planted it all up. And 6 months later, the whole thing is just exploding with plants, life. They planted flowers and fig trees, and it's amazing. It looks incredible now.
The neighbors all walk by and notice, and if they see us there, they stop us what's going on? We want to do this at our house. So in a city, you're in a unique place where if you do regenerate your yard, just like Todd said, your neighbors are going to see, and they're going to want to know what you're doing. It instantly piques people's interest to see this vibrant green.
Magician.
Yeah. Well, and Todd, a lot of your business has been, residential. Are you seeing still growth in that market, in the residential, either honestly, landscaping or also into food production?
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
In both in landscaping as well as also in food production.
Yeah, I haven't really marketed in quite a while, and haven't really tried to grow it because it's all word of mouth. But interesting. We have a lot more clients that have chickens and vegetable gardens, and they're growing their own food, and they're dabbling in, being, urban farmers. And I think it's great. I'm seeing a lot more of it, which is, I think, really important, that there's less dependency on the system, and people are becoming more, sustainable. And that's something I've really noticed. The commercial stuff with the consulting, I'm finding that a lot more people are committing to a several year program and process, where in the past it was oh yeah, I'll try a little this, and maybe I'll try your thing, but I'm also using this other guy, and they're just kind of all over the place. But people are becoming more committed, and that's a really noticeable thing for me, is that commitment.
Right. And, one part of the question too is around compacted soils. In large scale operations, if we want to deal with compaction, we have a lot of tools that we can use to do subsoiling and ripping the soil and things like that. In urban environments, you don't necessarily have that. So what about compacted soils? What are the techniques that we're going to use to convert those urban lots that are highly compacted?
Yeah, we deal a lot with compaction, and we have programs, as everyone knows on the call, is that, the soil food web, the teas and the extracts are important, and they're the catalyst, but they're not going to be a quick fix. And so it's a multi-pronged approach, dealing with the physical characteristic of the soil, dealing with the chemistry of the soil, and of course the biology. Chemistry is important because when we do chemistry tests, we follow through and make a commitment. We make the client commit to getting the chemistry right, especially calcium and magnesium. And, you can really flocculate that soil and break it up chemically, which takes time, but you got to follow through on it. And it's slower because we don't want to put too much salt down. So instead of a big giant application of salt lime, we're going to do it over a couple of years. But it's important to have that in the process, because that, chemically we can change the physics of the soil. And then also physically coming in there with a ripper or coming in there with a core aerator and filling those holes in with sand and compost. There's lots of things we can do, both biologically, chemically, and physically.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, I had a residential yard that was highly compacted. In fact, there was a Scots pine that was infected with turpentine beetle, and it was after they built their house. The area where the Scots pine was at was right next to their driveway. They stored a lot of materials on there, and the soil was extraordinarily compacted. In fact, the roots started growing on top of the soil. You see that in heavily compacted soils. And the tree was so impacted by this that it couldn't produce sap. I mean, the turpentine beetles were just boring holes into it, and the tree had no immune response back to it. Within 2 weeks, we took an air jack first to crack and break and fracture that heavy compaction, and then we hydraulically drilled holes with a deep root zone injector, and then apply compost extracts. And then, like Todd mentioned, multiple approach, applying it's just not one thing. We applied a heavy mulch on top of those trees. Within 2 weeks time frame, that tree started pumping out sap like crazy. And so the immune response was kind of immediate, and you could tell just the needles on the tree were down when we first started. Within 2 weeks, they started to really point upwards. It was just a really good kind of vigorous response to the tree. And overall, that residential yard had a lot of compaction, and within a year's time frame, we were able to remediate most of the compaction on that property, just by the different techniques and tools that we had.
Yeah, the trees really respond well to that, what we call vertical mulching, which I think you're alluding to. And we've done quite a bit of work with vertical mulching, and a lot of times we'll do a complete chemical and biological test of the soil, and we'll make a special backfill mix specific to that base soil when doing the vertical mulching. But I think just the alleviation and release of the gases, because things are so anaerobic in that environment, just that alone is really beneficial.
Right. Okay, anybody else want to add to this question before we move on? Okay, and this next question relates to some of the topics we've been talking about. So Kathy asked a question: what are deep root zone injections, and under what conditions would you use that method? I mean, I know that I think we've thrown that term around quite a few times today. So, good question, Kathy. So, who wants to take that one on?
So deep root zone injection is basically, we have it looks like a T, like a little T handle that we can hook up to a tank and a pump. And then it's got, however deep down you would like to go. Ours is, I think, 36 inches long. It's like a little bar with a pointed tip. And then at the bottom of that, there's little emitters, and we can have a lever on top. And so what you can do is you can actually use that to go down into the root zone of a perennial plant. In an area where you don't want to be tearing up and scratching up all the roots. You can push that injector down into the root zone, and then you can actually put compost tea or extract down into that root system without really disrupting the entire root network of that tree or shrub or perennial, of whatever it is you're working with.
Yeah, we do a boatload of deep root feeding with injectors of different types. And as you guys know, Casey, the tips wear out when you're constantly probing the hard rocky soils. Plus you have what's called a splash plate, and you can adjust that splash plate to get a depth of whatever you want. But when you're dealing with a lot of shrubs, you can tear apart those shrubs with the splash plate, so then you can remove it. So there's a lot of applications that you can manipulate your deep root soil injector, but also the back pressure is important. Some guys that do typical chemical treatments, they're at like 150 to 200 psi, which is obviously going to destroy and damage the microbes. So the limitation is the back pressure, right? We're in that 40 to 60 psi range. And so what happens is some of the soil that we work with is so compacted you put that probe in and it splashes right back up again. That's where you have to come in and do the vertical mulching. And there's also what's called an air spade that we use with a compressor. And it allows us to literally fracture the soil and break it apart without damaging the roots. And then we can kind of build a new soil structure for that root mass. So there's a lot of choices that we have when we're managing trees and shrubs. And the deep root injector is obviously one of those tools that we use quite a bit. We have probably 4 different injectors that we use to inject the compost teas and extract. And as you guys know, this is a great opportunity to enhance and introduce mycorrhizal fungi. Because as everyone knows, you just can't pour mycorrhizal fungi on top and expect it to get down into the rhizosphere. So.
And one other thing I was going to say about deep root zone injections in regards to compaction, there's a little bit of a misnomer. A lot of people think of compaction is that once the soil is compacted, it's compacted through the entire soil profile. What you'll find is you'll have zones of compaction. You know, you may go through and have a zone of compaction for 4 inches and then fairly uncompacted soil, then another zone of compaction farther down in the soil profile. The deep root zone injection helps us punch through those compacted zones to open up spaces for roots to be able to grow down into those other areas. So a deep root zone injection one can be a really useful tool in that sense as well. Okay, anything else before we move on? Okay.
Brian, I'll just mention one thing.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on some vineyards that we're actually using the deep root injection tool on existing vineyards because there's no way to really get the mycorrhizal in there and get the biology down into the roots. So we actually have some folks actually using the deep root injectors in their vineyards, in their orchards.
Yeah. And, you know, I saw there's a guy in New Zealand that has created this pretty massive or highly engineered truck that it's for orchard environments. Will drive in and, you know, without having a manual person putting in, you know, each one of those injections, they'll actually inject directly into the soil and then drive on and inject the soil. So you can do a large scale injection because it's a fairly labor intensive process to do the injections. Well worth it. But I think you can try to reduce some of the labor costs. It's interesting. Now, you know, you look at his truck doing the deep root zone injections, he probably spent $250,000 at least on designing that thing. So you're going to be talking about some large scale operations there. Cool. Yeah. Okay, let's try for another question here. This question is from Janet, and the question is it possible to regenerate most dirt? Is there some contaminants that cannot be removed in a timely manner or would never be safe to grow food in? What say you panelists?
Renald.
Yeah, I personally have no experience, but I would just get you to have some search on Paul Stammet. He's doing massive work remediating the mess that happened in Fukushima. So fungal remediation looks like excellent results.
I think what's important too is knowing how toxic or contaminated that soil is. It's going to take time. It took how long to get that way? So, and you know, that's why the forensics is so important to see how contaminated those soils are to determine if it can be remediated and how long it's going to take to remediate and how much of that base soil can actually still be used.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's a huge depends in there. I mean, I personally haven't come across a soil that couldn't be regenerated, but I've come across soils that seem to really slow down the regeneration process. And I suspect there are going to be soils that are highly contaminated where we'll really have to get very mindful about what the tools we use. And, you know, Renald mentioned fungi are some of the best remediators. They have the ability to break down complex chemical compounds into, you know, smaller and smaller elements, which then reduces that contamination. And I think there's going to be a large marketplace in figuring out which fungi are good at maybe decontaminating certain types of contaminants. And I know Paul Stammet's work is fantastic in that space.
Phytoremediation too. I have a few clients, one in particular, They had, I think it was like 10 acres that had an orchard on it for decades, using all the arsenics. High levels of arsenic was used. And they actually, not only did they try to remove some of that soil with bulldozers, but they also planted hemp. And within a year's time after removing the hemp, they had cut back almost 75% of that arsenic just by mechanically and phytoremediating it, which is just really impressive. So there are multiple ways to remediate, including obviously fungi biology.
Sure. And I think this is a huge business opportunity, to be honest with you, because the amount of, as Todd mentioned, the toxicity that we deal with in the day-to-day, we have severely polluted our lands, our watersheds, our air. There's going to be a lot of work into how can we actually remediate those contaminants out of those systems. So I think the work that we do in the soil food web fits squarely right into that marketplace for sure.
Well, the only thing I could just share on my experience is that just see how fast the amount of residues from glyphosate and other chemicals used in a conventional system can disappear, right? And so this can happen between one season and 3 seasons. So I would say yes, I consider those products as well as heavy contaminants. So yes, that works.
Agree. Okay, let's see. Let's see. I think we have time for one more question. We'll make it a really, really quick question at the very end here. And this is another question that came in, Todd, that you mentioned about vertical mulching. Is there anything more that you can describe upon what vertical mulching is and how it works?
Yeah, so depending on the size of the drill bit, the depth, typically most tree roots are anywhere from 12 to 18 inches in depth, depending on the soil type, if it's compacted or not. Typically, we use a drill bit on an electric drill, heavy-duty electric drill with a generator. And the drill size, the drill bit is anywhere from 1.5 inches to 3 inches. There's some variability on the size of that hole that you're drilling, because you have to be careful not to damage the roots, right? So when you're vertical mulching, we usually start about 1 foot from the trunk, and then we will go around about 2 feet apart, and then we'll alternate the holes on the next set, so on and so forth, all the way out to the drip line. Obviously, that's where most of the roots are. Once that's done, we actually use, do you know the yellow cones that they put out on the roads? It makes a fantastic funnel. So we just kind of cut the base off and use it as a funnel after we make a backfill. You know, typically we'll custom make a backfill, but as a general backfill mix, we like to use the USGA green sand, which is about 2 meters in size, millimeters in size. We mix that in with a really high-end vermicompost. Sometimes we'll use biochar and also humates. And then we also mix in mycorrhizal fungi because it's a great opportunity to get those spores right around the root zone. So we'll probably put about 5 or 6 different amendments. We might even put an organic feather meal or an alfalfa in there. So we have like a general mix that we'll put in, and then sometimes we'll customize that mix based on the soil test that we took from that site. But you'll take up anywhere, you know, an average tree that might be a 20 to 30 inch DBH could suck up 1.5 yards to 2 yards in all those holes. And then we'll basically rake it all out, and then we'll actually put maybe a ramial wood chip mulch as a final amendment on top, you know, maybe 1 inch or 2 of the ramial wood chips. Is that good enough description?
Oh, it's fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah.
I got some great video.
Yeah. It's great.
Could you repeat that last part?
Yeah, exactly. It's recorded.
How many inches
Go
did
back
you
and
say?
rewind it. Exactly. Okay. Well, I think we are at the end of our webinar. If you want to throw up that slide for us, Sammy, that just so we can recap what we covered in this webinar series. And then we'll go ahead and conclude. So this concludes our 4 webinars in our 3 steps to rapid soil regeneration. And just want to remind everybody that there are replays available. And so if you missed webinar 1, 2, or 3, by all means, go back and take a look at those webinars. I like it that we gave a pretty good story from start to end, which was, what are the microbes? What's a soil food web? How do you actually make products that have those microorganisms? How do you apply it with the results you see? And then talking about us as consultants doing the work that we do. So I want to thank our panelists today for providing their expertise and knowledge. I think it's great to be able to share this. I also want to thank that we have a lot of folks behind the scenes who make these webinars work. So I want to give a big kudos or shout out to everybody that puts these webinars together. It's a great team, and it's fantastic that we can do this stuff. So, all right, I think we can put a wrap on this.
Thank you, Brian, for hosting.
Yeah, no problem. I enjoy it. I love it.
Good job, Brian. Thank you.
All right, everybody.
Don't forget to click that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell to stay updated with all our new videos.